I can't, when you ask me for like proof that Biden could have done better, I can't do that. I can't give you a world where Biden was president.
Take the first issue you talked about, COVID. Would you say that Biden's been a success on that issue of COVID?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know how much the president, like a lot of this is going to come down to a state by state decision, and sometimes even a county by county decision on how they want to manage the coronavirus. In terms of what the president is able to do, the mandating all federal workers get vaccinated and have masks, the distribution of vaccines to the United States citizens, which I believe are still all completely free. I mean, like, these are good things, but I mean, the president can only reach so much into states when states still have the authority to write their own policy.
Okay, so we'll get in. We can start with COVID if you want, but I'll just say in general, I don't know what your stance was, but if I could guess, I would think that you would have thought that Trump was terrible on COVID. It's frustrating to me to see a lot of people in our national media and in the Democratic Party that wanted to blame Trump for every death that occurred under COVID with him. They didn't say, well, actually, it was more up to the states and things like that. And then when it's Biden, they're like, well, he can only do so much, when we see that there are more deaths under him than there were under Trump.
Yeah, so when people say that Trump was terrible on COVID, there is only so much that a president can do, but a president can provide guidance. That's all a president can do. Trump's guidance was first non-existent and then terrible. I would say that Biden's guidance has been good, but I mean, we could conceive of a world where Trump's guidance was better, but there were still deaths. But at that point, I wouldn't be blaming Trump over it. I mean, we literally had, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of cases in the U.S. that were still undiagnosed on a formal level. Well, Trump was denying that the coronavirus even existed, or that it was even coming, or that it wasn't going to be a big deal. To compare Trump's lead up to that over and over and over again, and the lackluster pushing of getting, the PPE and everything doled out, to what Biden has done, which has been to take it incredibly seriously. I would take Biden a million times over. If Biden would have been president instead of Trump, we probably would have been in a better position to absorb this virus than how we have now.
What would he have done differently?
So recognizing that it existed formally in the beginning probably would have spurred on more American support for things like PPE or like social distancing, rather than Trump, who continually denied it. And even today, when Trump says, hey guys, maybe you should get vaccinated, people are like, nah, fuck no. So I think that type of like moral or spiritual or leadership guidance would have gotten the American public in general to be in a more receptive state for state governors and then county and city leaders to enact these types of social distancing or other regulations to slow the spread of the virus.
I think that this is a cop-out for several reasons. One, the idea that it's not the policies and stuff, but it's mere just their guidance, their leadership. That's just bullshit. Secondly, Trump was taking this serious far earlier than even people like Fauci, right? For example, we heard Fauci in February on CNN and other places saying, oh, the regular flu is going to be worse. We had prominent Democrats, even after Trump started to talk about potential things we'd need to do, saying, there's no problem. Go out to Chinatown and hug a Chinese person. The only thing that Biden suggested that would have been different at the onset of COVID, which is where you're focusing, is he claimed that Trump banning travel from China was xenophobic. That's what he claimed. So how can you claim that Biden would have taken it more seriously when the very first thing he said that would have been different was, I wouldn't have banned travel from China because I think that has tinges of racism to it?
Okay, sorry, I'm just writing all this.
That's all right. Yeah, no problem.
If we want to jump into each claim, we can dig through these, but almost all of these are either half true or completely false. So first, when we say it's not the policies, it's their guidance, that's not a cop-out. Presidents are like, a president can set a legislative agenda. A president can work with politicians to get things passed. And a president can absolutely set the tone. If you want to get into a side argument for, can a president influence the beliefs of Americans and what they ought to do, and whether or not that becomes down the line instrumental to the types of policies that can pass, I can't imagine that you would seriously argue against that. But I mean, we can have that separate argument if you want. Number one. Number two, Trump was taking this seriously earlier than Fauci. This is just not true. So we can talk about, and Republicans have two talking points to go to. It's the Chinese travel ban and it's the European travel ban. Both of these were done after the WHO declared, a pandemic or declared a problem with China. Trump wasn't ahead on either of these things. If Trump was truly ahead, he would have banned travel from Europe the same day he banned travel from China. He waited over a month to do it. And in that waiting period, we did nothing. We did nothing to get ready. After we banned travel from China. We knew it was becoming a pandemic around the world, and we sat and waited. And then a month and a half later, like, oh, well, time to ban travel from Europe, when we aren't even fully testing people in the United States because it took us so long to get tests out of the US. We had no idea that it was spreading to thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. To say that Trump took it seriously earlier, I mean, like, this is just one of those, I'm trying to find a synonym for psychotic. We can all watch the videos. Everybody can go online and Google Trump talking about coronavirus, and we can see when there's like 1 case, 7 cases, like, oh, it's probably going to go away. Oh, there's not going to be many. Like, we all watched him say this. I don't even know if I'm willing to argue on this point. Everybody.
Who was saying otherwise? Who was saying otherwise? Was Joe Biden? Was Hillary Clinton? Was Nancy Pelosi? Was Chuck Schumer?
They weren't president, and they weren't privy to the same types of information that he was. Okay, number one. Okay, and then. But
the question, if I could just interrupt you,
I'm trying to get through all of it. Sure. So we can continue on. We heard Fauci say that the regular flu is going to be worse. I don't understand how simultaneously people will attack Fauci for saying it was going to kill millions and then attack Fauci saying it wasn't going to kill anybody. I'm sure that Fauci has updated his views over time. It seems like generally when Fauci is talking about things, they tend to update as more information comes out. I'm sure that I could find something back in like 2004, but like in late 2019 or early 2020 where Fauci said something that later ended up not necessarily being true. That's fine. That happens as this situation is evolving. Sure. When you talk about how I believe it might have been Pelosi, you didn't say a name, but I think it was Pelosi that said there's no problem. Go out to Chinatown and hug a Chinese person. This wasn't because they were saying there was no problem, as you disingenuously implied. It was because people like Trump, and then because of his things about calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus, because that happened later on in the United States, we saw a small uptick in hate crimes against Chinese people or Asian people in general, because Americans think all people are Chinese. And then we saw people like not going to Chinese restaurants and stuff because somehow this virus was unique to Chinese people. So, and as a response to the attacks that Chinese Americans had to deal with to their businesses and their persons sometimes, I think that's a totally fine statement. And it's not implying there's no problem. It's just saying the virus doesn't originate from Chinese people. Sorry, two more quick things. You said that claiming that Trump banned travel from China was xenophobic. This is a claim. I think I've heard you even say this before. I always try to look this up. I can never find that. All I find are people saying that calling it the Chinese virus or trying to blame Chinese people on this or using that verbiage was problematic. I don't think I could find things where people are like, oh, we should have never banned travel from China. I didn't see that. Or saying we can't ban travel from China. And then what's further evidence of this, you say if Biden was president or whatever, they wouldn't have done it. The United States just announced a preemptive travel ban on South Africa plus I think either 6 or 7 other African countries. How can you say they wouldn't have banned travel from China or any other country?
Well, based on
Dr. Mark, contributor,
getting a source here. So here is the tweet. It's from Joe Biden. It was the day that a day after the travel ban was announced from China. He said, quote, "We are in the midst of a crisis with the coronavirus. We need to lead the way with science, not Donald Trump's record of hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering. He's the worst possible person to lead our country through a global health emergency." So when Trump was announcing that he was going to do this ban, Biden almost at the exact same time announces that this is hysteria and xenophobia. Notice he uses the word hysteria as well. Now, you eloquently put it out a bunch of things that you think was bad with Trump. Fine. I could argue whether or not that's not the topic, though. The topic is what would Biden have done differently? You're just assuming Biden would have done something differently. When I talk about what prominent Democrats were up to, you really have no defense of that. You're just like, well, Nancy Pelosi did say go hug a Chinese person, but that's because there was an uptick of hate crimes because Trump was blaming this on China. That's one thing Trump did better was he blamed China, which we could see that Biden, for some reason, the big guy getting 10%, is hesitant to ever criticize China for COVID when we know that even if you don't think it came from a lab in China, that certainly China's lies, we now know that they knew that it was spread airborne and that it spread person to person months before they suggested it, which could have been a crucial time if that information would have been made available, that places in Europe and the United States could have prevented travel, which would have helped stop a lot of the initial problems that we saw. And yet the Biden administration doesn't want to criticize them. And instead what we see from the Democrats is saying, well, that reeks of xenophobia and there were upticks of Chinese American hate crimes. That's terrible. There were upticks in these crimes. A lot of them, though, there were an uptick in these crimes that were occurring even before that. And a lot of them weren't from what we would consider traditional Trump voters. In fact, a lot of Nation of Islam type members, there was a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes that were going on in New York. And this wasn't coming from Trump voters necessarily. Secondly, though, the fact that Biden spoke about this potentially being xenophobia, no Democrat, you keep saying Trump should have taken this more seriously early. Where were the Democrats doing so? You say Fauci would have changed his mind. On February 15th, 2020, Fauci was going on national TV saying, oh, this isn't going to be a big deal. What did you want Trump to do? You said he had access to better information. If the point person that he's relying on, Dr. Fauci, is going on national television and saying, this isn't a big deal. Look, it was a month later when Trump started issuing these things. So it was a very short turnaround. And to claim, well, that turnaround sent the signal for the whole thing is nonsense. If we want to talk about signaling and like guidance and leadership and that being an important role, again, we don't have any evidence whatsoever that Biden would have done things differently. In fact, we could see once Biden was president, what did he do? He signaled, great, and more people were dead than there were under Trump. So that signaling seems to be very ineffective. And secondly, what would this, let's talk about signaling. We had Biden, Kamala Harris, and other prominent Democrats that seemed to cast doubt on the very vaccine that they're now saying, oh, and I know that people say, oh, they were saying they didn't trust it because they assumed Trump would monkey with it and he would be involved in the FDA. Oh, you mean like Biden was involved in the FDA and 2 people from the head of the FDA were forced to resign because they didn't agree with Biden's pressure on them when it came to booster shots? So the idea, like, I keep hearing that if Biden would have been there, things would have been different. You've presented no evidence. I've yet to see anyone present evidence. And the proof is in the pudding. What has Biden done? What's Biden's strategy to COVID? Like, you say the president can only do so much. That's not true. There are things that both Biden and Trump didn't do that are disastrous. For example, one of the big things that the United States hasn't done is increased rapid and free testing to almost every person. Why haven't we invested? We have all of these emergency bills and decisions. Neither Trump nor Biden correctly invested that in saying if we could get tests in the hands of people, we could drastically diminish the amount of people that are spreading this virus because they'd be able to test at home. And yet they didn't do. And there's plenty of other things like that we could see. So the idea that it's just, well, providing guidance. And what exactly was the guidance? After they maligned the vaccine, then they said, oh, we're all in on the vaccine. That's our only strategy. Plus we think mask, which there's not proof does much, are good. And then Biden, he issued this mask mandate, for federal property. And what's the first thing he does? He goes out to the Capitol building, or maybe it was the Lincoln Memorial, and he takes a picture with his family violating his own order, which we've seen Biden and Democrats and even Republicans do over and over again. So the guidance has been shit all around, and none of the policies that Biden has issued have been any better than anything Trump did. In fact, you could argue that Biden is significantly worse because when he came into office, he should have had a plan. He already had the vaccines that he's relied so heavily on, and yet he's still been an abysmal failure.
Okay, so I can't, when you ask me for like proof that Biden could have done better, you're essentially conceding that Trump was about as bad as you could have been as a president, and then you're telling me to give you like a historical counterfactual of Biden. I can't do that. I can't give you a world where Biden was president. I can look at how Biden handled things as he came into office. I can look at the difference between how he's treated it publicly, which is very serious, versus Trump, who treated it as a fucking joke publicly, while behind the scenes admitting to people, it was in Woodward's book, that he said that it was very serious. You talk about how China could have released this information earlier. Trump knew in February that it was airborne. He knew that it was a serious thing, and he continued to downplay it publicly because he was more worried about his political image than the actual safety of fellow American citizens. I can't sit here and say, like, well, if Biden was president, would have done this. I don't know what Biden necessarily would have done as president, but I feel like Democrats in general were taking this more seriously from the start than the Republican side of things seem to have been. And I mean, we can see that how that's played out in terms of Republican lawmakers that have gotten sick with the coronavirus versus Democratic ones. We can see this in terms of voters and how they've responded to the situation. You keep saying like, oh, Democrats attacked the coronavirus vaccine. They attacked it. Who's the one not getting vaccinated today? Are you telling me that Republicans ignore Democrats in every single circumstance, except when it came to the vaccine? They listened to some of the early, very, very, very early, like single statements that some people might have said about being like, oh, well, I'll wait until the FDA approves it. Like, come on, this is like, this is insane that this is the one thing the Republicans listen to people on. So I thought we were here to talk about Biden's record. If we want, we can go back into Trump's presidency more. But like, again, this is just like one of those things where like we can all watch the videos. We can, if you want, we can bring up like videos and timelines of Trump continuing to downplay what's happening. You can blame this on like 1 or 2 statements from Fauci. But if you want to make the overall argument that Trump was taking this more seriously than Fauci was, like, it's just absolutely not true. Trump is on stage peddling bullshit cures, hydroxychloroquine, which ended up coming out to be harmful and then not helpful. We've got like Fauci cautioning people when it comes to things later on. Now, initially, he might have gotten the mask thing not right, but later on, he encouraged people to wear masks and do the social distancing. You've got Trump encouraging people to get vaccinated, getting booed for it at rallies. Again, we can go back and forth on like Trump's handling of this the entire time, but like, I can't tell you like for a fact 100% this is what Biden would have done differently because neither of us really know the answer to that question.
Okay, so I agree, but I'm saying even one of the big talking points as to why to vote against Trump was because of his handling of COVID. And my question always was there going to be a leader that would have handled it better? What would they have hypothetically done differently? And the best, at least you have an argument. Most people don't have an argument. Your argument's like, he would have had guidance. He would have talked differently. I think that would have done nothing. Like just a couple things you mentioned. You mentioned the Woodward book. Dr. Fauci was interviewed after he heard the quotes in the Woodward book, and he said that Trump's comments publicly at the time where he was talking and saying slightly different things to Woodward was in line with what medical advisors were suggesting to Trump what to say publicly, right? So he was basically being told, don't go freak everyone out horribly at the time. Fauci's admitted, who has no reason to lie for Donald Trump, that, yeah, basically he didn't have a problem with the way Trump was talking publicly about COVID at the time, right? Now, you keep talking about, well, what does this have to do with Trump? I agree. The problem is this. You're going to say, and this is what I thought would happen in this debate, let me just ask you a question before I continue. Would you say that you thought Trump was a very bad president?
I would say in general, yeah,
okay.
Atrocious.
So what's going to happen is, I might disagree with that, but the general thesis of this debate of how is Biden's record, how is he doing, you're going to say, well, better than Trump. But even if that's true and you think Trump was terrible, that doesn't mean Biden's doing good, right? If you say this guy was shit, Trump was shit, and Biden's slightly less shit. So we could look, you keep saying we could look at the record. Sure, we could look at the record of what was being said and things like that. Let's look at Biden's record on COVID. How's that looking? Pretty shitty. That's how it's looking. Well, he said that he was going to shut. He said he was going to shut down the virus and not the economy. That's not true. That's not what happened. We see all kinds of economic misery, which we'll get to when we get there. More people have died. The only thing that he's basically relied on was a vaccine that he had no hand in even giving lip service to creating. In fact, the opposite. He gave lip service to not trusting the vaccine. And we see, although you're technically right that it seems to be Republicans that are least likely to trust the vaccine, even if you think the vaccine's a good thing, let's not forget when it comes to different demographics, we can see a lot of people such as Black Americans that are distrusting of the vaccine. I wonder why. Why would predominant Democrat groups like Black Americans be distrusting? Could it be because people like Biden and people in his administration have constantly pushed this narrative that it's systemic racism in the U.S. government and the pharmaceutical industry, and I wouldn't trust this vaccine until magically after the election, all of a sudden, now we can trust the vaccine. Now that Biden's here, not only do we trust the vaccine, but we think you should have to take it. But the point is, all of this is a moot point. We don't blame the president for what their followers do. Who gives a shit if it's predominantly Trump supporters doing things you don't like? Biden's the president now. The buck stops with him, and he is shit on COVID. End of story. And I would like to hear you convince people why that's not the case.
So one of the big promises that Biden made was getting, I believe it was like 100 million Americans vaccinated in the first 100 days of his presidency. Didn't he hit that milestone on like day 60?
Yep,
so I would argue in terms of in terms of providing whatever necessary federal support was there to get the vaccine out to the United States citizens, he not only met, but he well exceeded that goal. In terms of, you keep bringing this number up like it's an own over and over again, like the number of people that have died. I mean, like Biden inherited, again, a Democrat inherits a shitty situation from a Republican. I mean, it's not like he can reverse course on everything at that point. The virus is here. It's already in every state and every community. I don't know how Biden's supposed to just like turn back time on that. In terms of, there's so many, hold on, Jesus, there's like so much like random shit you bring. If you want to like dive into one topic, I didn't know that also the coronavirus thing is just one part of the administration. And it like the difference in approach here, if I'm being honest in the debate, I could lie and try to say, oh, well, if Biden would have come in, he would have done. I don't know what Biden would have done 100% as a president, but I'm not here to only compare their stance to the coronavirus. I was mainly interested in like major legislative achievements and foreign policy, because it's a little bit easier to compare that on a one-to-one than a coronavirus pandemic that he walked into as it's going on and it's already been, in my opinion, botched by the previous leader. But then you're going to say, well, botched how? How could he have done something differently? And I can give you things maybe he would have done differently, but do either of us truly know that? We're both being demagogues at that point. Honestly, we're being honest with ourselves to say anything other than that. You don't know if Biden, but the reason why I tend to side with the fact that Biden probably would have taken it more seriously is because I think that Biden believed that it was a real issue. The Democrats believe that this is a real bad problem. There were Democrat states like New York that were being severely hampered by it. And it seems like Democrats in general in the United States, the voter base seems to have more aggressive support for measures related to the coronavirus. So that leads me to believe that a Democratic president probably could have handled it a little bit better. It's hard to say, but like when I look at things like, say, the Ebola scare, when there was some French doctor that was flown back, it seemed like Obama took that seriously. That was like nothing. Like the idea that Ebola was ever going to spread massively in the United States or in Europe is probably not going to happen. It's not the type of virus to do it. But even that, I was hearing Obama take that seriously and was giving public speeches about it, and people seem to be worried about it. when you talk about like Black Americans being distrustful of the vaccine, and then you try to pretend that it's because of statements that like Democratic leaders have made. Black people have a lot of reasons for why they may or may not trust different systems in the United States. I could be totally wrong on this, but I seriously doubt that the average Black American is tuning into CNN to get their political discourse for the day, and then they're making decisions on whether or not to trust the medical system based on what they hear on mainstream media news. It probably has more to do with a history of weird, fucky things that have happened to Black people in the United States. Tuskegee is brought up pretty often as an example. I'm willing to bet that combined with socioeconomic conditions, combined with their already adversarial attitude towards the system that is adversarial towards them, is probably going to lead to them to not trust the vaccine or care about it as much as other Americans. I don't know if I'm going to say that I'm going to blame a couple of statements made by Democratic leaders on how African Americans in the United States feel about the vaccine. That seems a little bit silly to me. If you
we'll get off COVID. The last thing I want to say.
Sure, okay, go for it.
I'm a little nervous on the COVID talk on YouTube. So.
Oh shit, yeah. Okay, well I'll just say this. I'll just ask one quick question then. Do you acknowledge that Biden and people in his administration seemed to cast shade on the vaccine before Biden won? And do you think that could have caused people hesitancy?
I think that there were like one or two statements that I want to say it was Kamala Harris said something about, where I don't think they full on said like, I'm not going to trust her, but it was something like it was something that was a little bit irresponsible. I was like, you probably shouldn't have said it that way. But like compared to how much Trump has cast out on everything related to the coronavirus stuff, not even remotely close.
Yeah, but if the big issue is people getting vaccinated or not vaccinated, that specific thing of casting shade, and it wasn't just Biden, it was certainly a lot of his administration and a lot of health experts that they were routinely touting that said it would be impossible. We wouldn't trust this. And Biden made those claims as well. The last thing I'll say is this, right?
Wait, you said Biden made a claim that he wouldn't trust a vaccine?
Yeah, Biden said, I'll try to find the actual quote. Let me see what I can find. Give me a second and I'll find it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, shit. Now I'm finding. Let's see if I can find it. But the other thing I want to say as I look for this is you say that actually, Biden did a good job meeting his goal of 1 million a day, and he may have even surpassed that. But the reality is Biden's claim to get 1 million a day was already being met basically by Trump when he left office. So it's hardly an achievement that Biden came in and just continued Trump's plan. This is what Biden said in August 6, 2020. The way Trump talks about the vaccine is not particularly rational. He's talking about being ready. He's going to talk about moving it quicker than scientists think it should move. People don't believe he's telling the truth. Therefore, they aren't certain they're going to take the vaccine. And one more thing, if and when vaccines comes, it's not likely to go through all the tests that need to be done and the trials that are needed to be done.
Who is this a quote from?
Biden.
Um,
Another quote from Biden, September 2nd, 2020. Look at what's happened. Enormous pressure put in the CDC not to put the detailed guidelines. The enormous pressure being put on the FDA to say they're going, that the following protocol will in fact reduce. It will have a giant impact on COVID. All these things turn out to not be true. And when a president continues to mislead and lie, when we finally do, God willing, get a vaccine, who's going to take the shot? Who's going to take the shot? You're going to be the first one to say, put me, sign me up. Now they say it's okay. I'm not being facetious. Again, Biden. And there's more if you want. I got a whole list of them.
I think we're probably on the same PolitiFact article, and I see I see the first statements that you're not reading. So in terms of what was said on August 6th, right? Biden said the way that Trump talks about the vaccine is not particularly rational. He's talking about it being ready. He's going to talk about moving it quicker than the scientists think it should be moved. People don't believe that he's telling the truth. Therefore, they're not at all certain that they're going to take the vaccine. And one more thing, if and when the vaccine comes, it's not likely to go through all the tests that need to be done and the trials that are needed to be done. I think that early on, and I would have to go back and dig through quotes again because I wasn't ready for a coronavirus discussion, but Trump did talk a lot about expediting the vaccine, and it seemed like there was a lot of political pressure from him that he wanted to get the vaccine out as quickly as possible. If that is the case, then I could understand people being a little bit nervous about it. And earlier, Kamala Harris seemed to echo as much because the quotes for one of her statements was, if the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. So it seems like there was something else there. Now, I would actually go a step farther and say any type of undermining the vaccine is probably not a good thing. But I don't think that these were necessarily like the vaccine is bad and horrible, but probably more to do with Trump's incredibly obsessive public face of like getting it out as quickly as possible, which I think, Republicans now are worried about that, right? It's so ironic because when I try to follow down, like, well, who did these arguments end up affecting? If I take you at your word for this and I ignore anything around the quotes, and it seems like Democrats are saying, like, man, the vaccine might be rushed, man, the vaccine might be not be safe. It seems like it's all done for political reasons. Who are the people that are making these arguments today? It's not Democrats. It's all Republicans. So the idea that you're saying Democrats made these arguments and they were irresponsible, the only people that echo these arguments are Republicans, seem like they didn't really hit Democrats or weren't a big part of their messaging early on, because all the people that are acting like this and putting these messages out are Republicans that don't want to get vaccinated.
There's very few. There are very few people in leadership in the Republican Party that are suggesting not getting vaccinated. And the other thing is, when you're the only thing you could tout that Biden would do good versus the coronavirus is his guidance, sort of his messaging. And the one issue that he, and I would assume you, thinks the most important when it comes to vaccine, we could see when it was politically expedient. By the way, Trump was talking about having people be available to have shots by March. That's exactly the timeline that happened. But we had all of these leaders, including Biden and other medical professionals, saying it would be impossible to develop a vaccine that quick. That did more harm, even with Trump supporters that still tout to that and say, yeah, even though Trump tells me to get the vaccine, the reality is we had all these professionals saying it would be unsafe to have a brand new type of vaccine like that to come out so quick. And that's one of the big reasons I'm distrusting. Even the Democrats said it. But I'm willing to move on.
But the Democrats aren't echoing that, right? Like,
who cares? They did when it met.
But you care because your argument is that Democrats caused harm by undermining the vaccine. Well, okay, did that actually happen? And then when I look at the effect on the public, it doesn't seem that's the case. And when I look at other statements that Biden has made, and I'm sure you see these because it sounds like we're on the same page, Biden literally says, charting a clear path of science-based vaccines free from politics. I get asked the question, if the president announced tomorrow that we have a vaccine, would you take it? And then he says, only if it was completely transparent, that other experts in the country could look at it, and only if we knew all of what went into it. Because so far, nothing he's told us has been true. That seems like a fair statement. I still think maybe you probably shouldn't say that. But like, when I look at how this has affected the United States population, if we had a ton of Democrats that were refusing to get vaccinated, I would agree with you. It's like, yeah, that you guys fucked up. You caused a lot of harm. But that doesn't seem to be the case. These are problems on Republican side. So I just categorically reject the idea that these are like harmful statements that Democrats made, because at the end of the day, it had almost no effect on the Democrat public.
It doesn't matter if it had effect. You think that Republicans don't listen to what the Democrats are saying? And the point is this.
No, I don't. Absolutely not.
Sure they do. Of course. Go listen to them. How many?
Wait, is your argument? I'm just curious on this one. You think that, and I'll even steal it. I won't say this as ridiculous as it sounds. You think that some parts of the reason why Republicans won't get vaccinated is because of statements Kamala Harris and Joe Biden made about the vaccine?
I think it was probably people that were going to be distrusting anyways, but they point as evidence the fact that even Democrats, when it wasn't politically expedient for them, said that there are dangers and it would be impossible to release a vaccine this fast. They point to that and say, see, even they knew. And the reality is, you can say what you want. The guidance was quite simple. We could beat around the bush. We know the truth. What changed when all this, you think all of a sudden Biden was like, and Kamala were like, oh, we have better evidence now that the election's over. Now we think that the vaccines are good. No, you know what happened was they knew that COVID was a big weakness for Trump. And so they downplayed him talking about vaccines and that being a potential thing that could help out, because they knew that downplaying would help them in the election. They were willing to sacrifice people if it meant helping them in the election. That's what fucking happened. Me and you both know it. But we can move on from COVID if you want. It's up to you.
Yeah, so I'm curious on a counterfactual then here. You think that if Trump's election would have continued on, do you think that Democrats would have been undermining the vaccine and that Republicans would be running out to get vaccinated and the Democratic leadership would say, we don't trust the vaccine?
I don't know if it would have been that severe, but yeah, they would have said that there were decisions being made medically that was being rushed through and Trump was influencing the FDA and other places like that. When in reality, we can see that it's the exact opposite. The only people that we know put pressure on the FDA was the Biden administration, which caused the resignation of two of the top people at the FDA, being so furious that they were being rushed to produce it being okay for these boosters. They thought that was Biden putting pressure on it. But if you want to keep going COVID, we can. I think that anyone here...
Which FDA resignations are you talking about?
Let me find them.
Yeah, because I know there were some FDA resignations, but I thought this had to do with the types of medications that the FDA was approving, specifically over an Alzheimer's drug.
No.
To be clear, hold on, real quick. It's unfair that I'm like asking you for the specific thing. I'm not trying to like source you in the middle of the debate. But I do know that there were some FDA resignations that happened because it had to do with an Alzheimer's drug, I believe, that was approved. And the problem that they had was that the Alzheimer's drug didn't show that it was treating Alzheimer's, just that it was treating an underlying condition. I think the accumulation of an amyloid plaque, but that didn't necessarily mean that it was treating the Alzheimer's disease. That was my understanding of it.
In a letter,
But there might have been some other resignations.
Yeah, so this is from Business Insider. It says, in a letter announcing the resignations obtained by the biotech industry publication Endpoints, Dr. Peter Marks, the director of the FDA Center for Biological Evaluation Research, praised the pair for their work during the COVID pandemic. He didn't give a reason for their departure, but sources told Endpoints and Politico that Gruber and Krause were upset with Biden administration's booster shot plan. The administration announced last month that most people would be offered a COVID-19 booster shot about 8 months after the vaccination. One former senior FDA leader told Endpoints that Gruber and Krause were leaving because they felt the Center for Disease Control and Prevention was making vaccine decisions that should have been left to the FDA and were upset with Marks, the leader of their division, for not insisting on the agency's oversight.